The morning Ava found the receipt, she almost threw it away. It had been crumpled and stuffed deep into the front pocket of Mark's jeans, the jeans he never wore to work. The dry cleaner's logo was smeared, but she could still make out the date and the description. Silk dress, red, $1,249. Ava sat on the edge of their bed, the paper trembling in her hand. She didn't own a red silk dress. She hadn't bought anything like that in years. Not since the kids, not since the endless mortgage payments and daycare bills and careful grocery lists. For a moment, she could almost convince herself there was an explanation. Maybe it was a gift for her. Their anniversary was next month. After all. Maybe, but Mark hated surprises, hated shopping, hated anything that resembled spontaneity. He was a man of routines, turkey sandwiches on wheat, office meetings on Tuesdays, beer with Mike and Sean on Fridays. A man who rarely glanced up from his phone when she walked into a room. Ava dropped the receipt onto the bedspread like it had burned her fingers. Downstairs, she heard the front door creak open. Mark's voice followed, calling out, "Hey, babe, I'm home." She didn't answer right away. She needed a minute, a wall to build inside herself. Chapter 2. Fracture over dinner. Ava watched him. The way he chewed, the way he laughed too hard at nothing, the way he checked his phone twice before dessert. "You okay?" he asked, finally noticing her silence. His forehead creased, the way it always did when he sensed something wrong but wasn't sure if it was big enough to matter yet. "Yeah, just tired," she said, twisting her wedding band around her finger. She could confront him now. She could lay the receipt down between them like a blade. Instead, she smiled, reached for the wine, and asked about his day. Ava needed time. She needed to think. The next morning, after dropping the kids at school, she called Tasha, her oldest friend, the kind of friend who knew where all the bodies were buried. "You don't know anything yet," Tasha said after Ava recounted everything. "Maybe it's innocent. Maybe it's for you. And if it's not, then you get a lawyer before you get mad." Chapter 3. Investigation. The private investigator Tasha recommended was a woman named Lena Rios. She was brisk, professional, and didn't sugarcoat things. "You want surveillance, phone records, background checks?" she asked, tapping notes into her tablet. "Just the truth," Ava said. "Whatever it is, it took less than a week." A grainy photo arrived on Ava's phone. Mark in a dark restaurant, leaning across the table toward a woman Ava didn't recognize. Dark hair, red dress, his hand resting lightly over the woman's fingers. The date stamp matched the day before. Their son's soccer championship, the day Mark had claimed to be working late. When Ava zoomed in on the woman's face, she felt a hollow ache deep in her chest. Not because the woman was beautiful, though she was, but because Mark looked happy. Happier than Ava had seen him in months. Chapter 4. Shifting ground. That night, Ava waited until the kids were asleep. She poured herself a drink. Whiskey, not wine, and sat on the living room couch, the damning photos open on her phone screen. Mark came in from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw her face and froze. "What?" he asked cautiously. She tossed the phone onto the coffee table. It landed with a sharp crack. His eyes darted to it. His mouth opened and closed like he was searching for a script. "Say something," Ava said, her voice low and shaking. Mark sat heavily on the armchair across from her. "It's not what you think," he said. "The oldest lie in the book. Then tell me what it is." He scrubbed his hands over his face. "It's complicated. Start somewhere." He did. A 6-month affair. A woman from his gym, of all places. "It was just sex at first," he said. "It didn't mean anything." But the words rang hollow even as he said them. Ava could see it in the slump of his shoulders, the way his hands twisted nervously in his lap. She asked questions she didn't want answers to. He answered some. Lied about others. She could tell. Why? She whispered at last. Was I not enough? He shook his head violently. No, you were everything. His voice cracked. I was lonely, Ava. We barely even talk anymore. And whose fault is that? Neither of them had an answer. Chapter 5. Fault lines. Over the next few weeks, Ava moved through the motions of normal life like a ghost. Soccer practice, grocery shopping, dinner plans with neighbors. Mark tried harder than she had ever seen, cooking dinner, planning date nights, sending long apologetic texts. She ignored most of them. Sometimes she wondered if she was dragging out the punishment just to savor the control. Other times, she wanted to scream, to tear the whole life they had built to pieces, just to stop hurting. Ava met Lena for coffee one afternoon and confessed everything. The rage, the sadness, the small moments when she missed him so much her chest hurt. Forgiveness is a choice, Lena said, just like revenge is. But how do you know if you're making the right one? Ava asked. You don't, Lena said simply. You just live with it. Chapter 6. Aftershocks. In the end, Ava told Mark he had to move out, for a while at least. She needed space. Time to think. I'll wait, Mark said, his voice rough with emotion. However long it takes. But Ava wasn't sure if waiting would be enough. Some cracks never healed. Some became fault lines, dangerous and deep, waiting for the next tremor. As she watched him drive away that night, tail lights fading into the misty dark, Ava felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. She was free now. But she was alone, too. She closed the door behind her and leaned her forehead against the wood. Outside, the world kept moving, indifferent. Inside, Ava sat down at the kitchen table, stared at the empty chair across from her, and wondered if love was ever really enough, or if it was just another story we told ourselves right up until the fault lines gave way. End. Ava didn't sleep that night. She sat up scrolling through old photos on her phone. Birthdays, beach trips, those first exhausted, joyful days after the kids were born. Mark's arm around her, his smile so natural it hurt to look at. Had he been pretending all along, or had they both just changed without noticing? The next morning, Ava found herself dialing Lena again. This time her voice was steady, almost detached. I want you to dig deeper, she said. There was a pause. Deeper. How? Lena asked carefully. Bank accounts, emails, private messages, everything. You think there's more? I know there's more, Ava said. Chapter 8. Secrets within secrets, it didn't take long. Lena uncovered a hidden checking account, small but active. Weekly cash withdrawals. Hotels in the city booked for afternoons, not nights. An online dating profile under a fake name, abandoned now, but still traceable. And something worse. A text string between Mark and another woman, one Ava hadn't seen before. The messages weren't about romance, they were about money, about a favor she had done for him at her company, something shady. Something that sounded a lot like insider trading. Mark hadn't just betrayed their marriage. He had broken the law. For the first time since the betrayal, Ava felt something close to power bloom in her chest. She could ruin him if she wanted. Chapter 9. A Different Kind of Justice. That night, when Mark called to check on the kids, Ava answered. We need to meet, she said. Her voice brooked no argument. They met at a quiet bar halfway between the house and his rented apartment. Mark looked wrecked, unshaven, circles under his eyes, wearing the same jacket he had the night he proposed to her. Ava almost felt sorry for him. Almost. She laid a manila folder between them. He paled when he saw the contents. You've been spying on me? He hissed, his voice low but sharp. You were lying to me. she said calmly. Don't get righteous now. Mark flipped through the documents, his hands shaking. What do you want, Ava? He finally asked. Ava smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're going to sign over the house, full custody, no fight, no drama. He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. Because if you don't, I'm going to send this to the SEC and the police, and every miserable small-town gossip site I can find. Mark slumped back in his chair. His breath came in shallow pants. You wouldn't, he said weakly. You gambled our life away, Mark. You don't get to decide how I play my hand now. For a long, taut moment, they stared at each other. Two people who had once shared everything, now reduced to this grim negotiation. At last he nodded. Okay, he said. His voice broke. You win. Chapter 10. Collateral Damage. The weeks that followed were brutal. Lawyers, mediation, angry text messages that Ava left unanswered. Mark moved farther away, closer to his new job, smaller, lower paying, humbling. The kids didn't understand, not fully. Ava told them it wasn't their fault, that sometimes grown-ups needed space to figure things out. She didn't mention the betrayal or the broken laws or the way she'd hollowed herself out to survive. At night, sometimes, she wondered if she had gone too far, if she had crossed some invisible moral line, if revenge had changed her into someone she wouldn't recognize a year ago. But when she looked at her children sleeping peacefully, when she thought of the woman in the red dress, the offshore accounts, the lies he fed her for months, she reminded herself she had chosen survival over fantasy. Chapter 11. New Fault Lines. 6 months later, Ava stood in her empty living room, the sunlight slanting through the blinds. The house was hers now, but it felt cavernous, lonely. There was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Tasha standing there holding a bottle of wine. Happy divorce day, Tasha said with a crooked smile. Ava laughed, genuinely, for the first time in a long time. As they toasted on the back deck, Ava allowed herself to imagine a future, not perfect, but real. A life built on something stronger than illusions. Still, late that night, as she locked up and turned out the lights, she caught herself glancing at the shadows, half expecting Mark to emerge from them, smiling that same old apologetic smile. And she wondered, had she truly escaped him? Or had he simply burrowed into some deeper place inside her, waiting to fracture her all over again? The end. Spring came late that year. The trees outside Ava's house bloomed awkwardly, petals dropping like confetti onto the cracked driveway. Ava was doing better. Mostly, she had started a part-time consulting job, something flexible, manageable. The kids were adjusting. There were even moments, quiet ones, when she forgot to feel angry, forgot to check every shadow for ghosts. Until one afternoon, when she picked up the mail. At first glance, it looked like junk. Real estate flyers, coupons, a glossy catalog for outdoor furniture she couldn't afford. But tucked among them was a small, unmarked envelope. Inside, a single photograph. Ava, walking the kids home from school. Smiling, holding their hands. Taken from a distance. Her heart stuttered. On the back, written in careful, unfamiliar block. Letters. You never really know someone. Chapter 13. New tectonics. The police weren't much help. No direct threat, Officer Patel said, flipping the photo over with gloved hands. Could be a prank, a disgruntled neighbor, maybe even your ex trying to scare you. Ava wanted to scream. How could they be so calm? Didn't they see the violence? Hidden in the act itself? After they left, she double-locked the doors, closed every blind, installed cameras at every entry point. At night, she sat awake, the house groaning and settling around her like an animal breathing. Every creak set her nerves on fire. She didn't call Mark. She refused to. Maybe it was him. Or maybe it was someone else. Someone from the darker parts of his life she hadn't uncovered yet. Chapter 14. Collision Course. Weeks passed. No more letters. No more photos. Ava tried to move on again, piecing herself back together like a broken vase, careful not to see the cracks too clearly. And then, on a Wednesday, Tasha didn't show up for their usual coffee date. No text, no call. Ava tried not to panic, tried to be reasonable, but when she finally reached Tasha's roommate, the girl said she hadn't seen Tasha since yesterday. And she sounded worried. Ava's mind raced. Car accident, work emergency, something worse? That night, another envelope arrived, this one heavier, thicker. Inside, two things. A necklace Ava recognized instantly. Tasha's delicate silver locket, snapped cleanly in two. And a USB drive, no note, no explanation, just a cold, silent dare. Chapter 15. Choices. Ava stared at the drive for hours before she plugged it into her laptop, her hands slick with sweat. There was only one file, a short, grainy video at A. First, it was just static. Then the image sharpened. A dark room, a woman sitting slumped against a chair, tied, her face bloody and blurred. Tasha. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers. Artificial, genderless. You think you can destroy someone and walk away clean? The camera tilted, revealing a second chair. Empty. Waiting. For every betrayal, there's a reckoning. Come alone. Coordinates flashed across the screen, and then the video ended. Chapter 16. The edge of the knife Ava sat frozen long after the screen went black. Her first instinct was to call the police. To run. To not walk into whatever trap this was. But she knew two things with brutal clarity. If she called for help, whoever was behind this would vanish. Tasha might die anyway. And whoever it was knew Ava better than she knew herself. This wasn't about random violence. This was about punishment, about debts unpaid, about fault lines that hadn't just cracked, but split wide open under her feet. Ava closed her laptop, wiped her face with shaking hands. She had destroyed one life already. Was she willing to destroy another to save herself? Or worse, was she willing to risk dying because part of her believed she deserved it? She packed a bag, flashlight, phone, a small kitchen knife, no police, no backup, no lies, just herself. And the truth. Chapter 17. Tremors. The coordinates led to an abandoned industrial park, miles outside town. The sun was sinking when she arrived, the sky bleeding orange and red. Ava parked far away and approached on foot, her heart hammering, so hard she thought it might give her away. Inside the warehouse, it smelled of rust and old wood. Tasha? She called softly, every nerve ending on fire. Movement flickered in the corner of her vision. She turned and came face to face with Mark, alive, smirking, arms crossed casually over his chest. You didn't really think it was over, he said, behind. Him? Someone else stepped out of the shadows. The woman in the red dress. Only she wasn't wearing red anymore. Just black. Practical. Efficient. You should have picked forgiveness, Ava, the woman said. Ava backed away, heart clawing against her ribs, knife slipping from her bag into her hand. This wasn't just revenge. It was something bigger. Something she'd never seen coming. The ground beneath her seemed to split, and Ava realized with sudden, soul-deep certainty, some betrayals didn't end in forgiveness. They ended in blood. Ava gripped the knife tighter behind her back. Her breath was shallow. Mark moved first. Not quickly, not aggressively, just closing the space between them like a man who still thought he had all the power. Think about this, he said almost tenderly. You don't have to make it worse. We can fix this. We can start over. Ava almost laughed. The sound clawed at her throat, half hysterical. Start over? She whispered. After everything? You made it worse, said the woman. No, the co-conspirator, her voice slicing into the air. You could have stayed quiet, played your part. Ava edged back, buying herself inches. Where's Tasha? Mark smiled thinly. Safe, for now. The woman tilted her head. You can trade yourself for her. Clean swap, no mess, no police. Ava's mind raced. It was a lie, of course. Even if she surrendered, they'd tie up loose ends. She wasn't naive enough to believe otherwise. You're going to have to kill me, Ava said, forcing steel into her voice, because I'm not giving you anything else. And then she moved. Chapter 19. Shatterpoint. She faked left, then lunged right, knife flashing out toward Mark's side. He grunted, stumbling, but caught her wrist, twisting brutally. The blade clattered to the concrete floor. Ava drove her. Knee up into his gut, breaking free for a second, long enough to grab a rusted metal pipe leaning nearby. The woman rushed her, fast, brutal, no hesitation. Military, maybe. They grappled, Ava swinging the pipe wildly, connecting with a sickening crack against the woman's shoulder. Mark recovered, blood dripping from his side, face twisted with rage. You ruined me, he shouted, charging again. They crashed into a stack of rotting crates, the air knocked out of Ava's lungs. In the chaos, she glimpsed something. A door, slightly ajar, a narrow stairwell leading down. If Tasha was here, she was below. Chapter 20. The descent Ava bolted for. The stairwell, blood pounding in her ears. Shouts followed her, heavy footsteps. She stumbled down into darkness, groping for a light switch, finding only damp concrete and the faint scent of mildew. In the far corner, bound and slumped against a pipe, was Tasha, alive. Barely. Ava, Tasha croaked, her eyes wide and terrified. No time, Ava gasped, working the knots with shaking fingers. Above them, Mark's voice echoed down the stairwell. Come back up, Ava. Let's end this clean. Ava's hands slipped on the ropes, slick with Tasha's blood. You don't have to die for this, the woman called down, voice almost weary. Walk away. Forget her. Save yourself. For one awful, frozen second, Ava hesitated. She could still leave. Walk out. Survive. But then Tasha looked at her, hope flickering faintly in her bruised face, and Ava knew. If she abandoned Tasha now, she would never be free of it. Not ever. She finished cutting the rope. Can you run? Ava whispered. Tasha nodded, weak but determined. Then we run. Chapter 21. Earthquake. The escape was messy, brutal. They fought their way up the stairs, Ava swinging the broken pipe like a sword. Tasha stumbled behind her, barely able to stand. Mark lunged, grabbing at Ava's jacket. She turned and drove the pipe into his shoulder, not holding back this time. He screamed, a raw animal sound, and crumpled. The woman tried to draw a gun. From her waistband, Ava glimpsed the glint, but Tasha, with a last desperate surge, tackled her from behind, sending the gun skittering across the floor. Ava grabbed it first, and for a terrible, frozen moment, she pointed it at them. Mark, bleeding, eyes wide with disbelief. The woman, furious but helpless. You're not a killer, Ava, Mark croaked. You're not like us. Ava's hand trembled on the trigger. No, she said, her voice breaking. I'm not. She threw the gun across the room out of reach, and she and Tasha ran into the night, into the unknown. Chapter 22. Fault lines, rewritten, the police found them an hour later, stumbling along the highway, clothes torn, faces bloodied. Ava gave a statement. She left nothing out. She didn't care anymore. About saving face. About appearances. About protecting the fragile lies of her old life. Mark and the woman were arrested 2 days later, found hiding in a motel a few towns over. The charges stacked up: assault, kidnapping, conspiracy. Insider trading resurfaced. Everything Mark had, hidden, boiled to the surface, ugly and undeniable. The media called Ava a hero. Some called her a fool, but she didn't care. She had survived. She had saved Tasha. She had chosen herself. Epilogue. Fault lines. Remain. Months later, Ava stood by the cliffs near her childhood home, the ocean roaring below. The sun set in ribbons, of red and gold, a fiery bruise against the horizon. She still bore the scars, inside and out. Trust didn't come easily, sleep even less. Some nights she dreamed of Mark's face, broken, pleading. Some mornings she woke up half expecting to find another envelope on her doorstep. The future stretched out before her, jagged and uncertain. But Ava was not afraid anymore. She had faced the earthquake. She had walked the fault lines, and somehow, impossibly, she was still standing. The end. The coffee shop was new. Light wood floors, soft music, sunlight flooding through high windows. Ava hesitated in the doorway, the bell above her chiming too loudly in her ears. It had taken her a month to even agree to meet someone, longer to believe she might deserve a life beyond survival. She scanned the room, nerves taut. Then she spotted him, Ben, a friend of Tasha's from her old college days. Someone safe, kind, ordinary in the best ways. Ben smiled when he saw her. Not the hungry, demanding smiles Ava had learned to distrust. Just warm, patient. "Hey," he said, standing to pull out a chair for her. "Hey," Ava echoed, her voice surprisingly steady. They ordered coffee, talked about nothing important, books, travel, funny news articles. The conversation flowed, easy but cautious, like stepping carefully across a frozen lake. At one point, Ben asked, "So, what brought you back to town?" Ava sipped her coffee. Considered lying. Decided not to. Needed a fresh start, she said simply. Needed to rebuild some things that broke. Ben didn't press. Just nodded, as if he understood that some scars didn't need full explanations. Outside, the first leaves of autumn swirled across the sidewalk. Ava glanced at the window, half expecting, half dreading, to see some shadow from her past watching her. But there was no one there. Just the reflection of a woman. Older, maybe, harder, but still here, still building, still trying. She turned back to Ben and smiled. A real smile, small but sincere. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't forgetting. It was something harder, something stronger, the beginning of a life she would write herself, broken pieces and all. Final line. Some fault lines never disappeared. But Ava had learned you could still build a home on cracked ground if you were brave enough to stay and plant the first stone. End. Weeks passed. Ben never asked for more than Ava could give. They met sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks by the river, the leaves crunching underfoot. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, just shared silence, something Ava found more comforting than she'd expected. One evening, Ben invited her to a small gallery opening, his sister's photography exhibit. Ava almost said no. Crowds still made her skin prickle. But something in her, stubbornness maybe, or the tiny flicker of wanting, made her say yes. The gallery was full of strangers, laughing, drinking, easy in their bodies in a way Ava no longer remembered how to be. She stayed close to Ben, feeling the old panic rise like a tide. Then she saw one of the photographs, a cracked sidewalk, grass growing up through the breaks, a little plaque underneath. Resilience. Ava stared at it for a long time, her throat tight. Ben came to stand beside her. "That one's my favorite," he said quietly. She didn't speak, didn't trust her voice. Ben didn't push, just stood there, a steady presence. And for once, Ava didn't feel like she was drowning. She didn't feel like she was running. She was just standing, breathing, alive. She turned to him, and in a moment that felt small but enormous, she reached out and touched his hand, not clinging, not seeking rescue, just choosing. Ben squeezed her fingers gently. No pressure, no demands. The future was still a chasm in front of her. There would be bad days, nightmares, panic. But maybe, just maybe, there would be good days too. Days like this, when resilience didn't feel like a fight, but a quiet, stubborn kind of hope. Ava allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to imagine something that didn't end in betrayal, something growing out of broken ground. Final image. Ava standing before the photograph, sunlight catching her face. Ben beside her, hands barely touching, the cracked sidewalk in the frame before them, imperfect, resilient, alive. And Ava, no, longer running from the fault lines inside her, learning, at last, how to live among them. Autumn deepened into winter. The first snow caught Ava off guard, fat flakes drifting onto her coat as she left the coffee shop where she and Ben had lingered over cocoa and old vinyl records. She pulled her scarf tighter, heart full in a way she didn't quite know how to carry. It was after dark when she noticed it. A shadow too still across the street. A car idling just a little too long. Old instincts prickled awake. Ben touched her arm. "You okay?" She forced herself to smile. "Fine. Just tired." She didn't tell him about the car, about how her mind raced tallying exits, memorizing license plates without realizing it. Ben didn't push. He just walked her to her door, waiting until she was safely inside before driving away. Ava watched from behind the curtain until his headlights disappeared. Only then did she let herself breathe again. New chapter. Ghosts in the walls. That night, Ava dreamed of Mark. Not the charming man he had once been. The other one. The liar. The manipulator. In the dream, he wasn't angry. He was calm, smiling. "You can't erase me," he said. "I'm part of you now." Ava woke with a gasp, drenched in, cold sweat. The clock blinked 3:14 a.m. She padded barefoot to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water. The house creaked around her. Familiar sounds, normal sounds. Still, she double-checked the locks. Still, she slipped the heavy flashlight into her bedside. Drawer, just in case. Healing was not forgetting. Healing was learning to live with the memories without letting them drown her. New chapter. Trust. Again. A week later, Ben invited her to a New Year's gathering at his sister's cabin. Just a few people, he promised. Bonfire, hot cider, nothing big. Ava wanted to say no. Every cell in her body wanted to say no, but she didn't. She went, and she stood with a mug of cider warming her hands, watching the firelight dance in the snow. Someone set off a few small fireworks down the hill. Ava flinched instinctively. But when she caught Ben's steady gaze across the fire, she anchored herself there. She wasn't the woman she had been a year ago. She wasn't unbreakable, but she wasn't broken either. Somewhere deep inside, she felt it, a shift, a small, almost imperceptible settling of the cracks, not healed, not whole, but strong in a different way, a way Mark and the past could never take from her. Final scene. A letter. Never sent. Later that night, in her room at the cabin, Ava opened her journal, a battered thing she'd carried since leaving the hospital, and she wrote, "Dear Mark, you don't own the story of my life. You don't own my fear or my future. I lived through you, And now I will live past you. You will fade. I won't. She stared at the words for a long time. Then she closed the journal. Left the letter unsent. Outside, the snow fell clean and silent, burying the past inch by inch, and Ava, for the first time in a long time, slept without dreaming. True closing line. Not all scars needed hiding. Some could be carried like armor, shining faintly under the skin, proof that she had survived the fire, and chosen to keep walking into the unknown anyway. The new year slid into motion with the soft certainty of falling snow. Ava started working part-time at a non-profit downtown. Paperwork, grant applications, volunteer outreach, small, quiet work. Work that mattered without drawing headlines. At first, she kept her distance from the others, but slowly, without meaning to, she let small connections form. Maya, the program director with a silver streak in her hair and a wicked sense of humor. Omar, the endlessly patient volunteer coordinator who baked cookies for every meeting. Lena, a former client turned social worker who wore grief and strength openly, like matching bracelets. No one asked for Ava's story. And for the first time, she didn't feel defined by the pieces she chose to keep private. Chapter. Echoes. Sometimes she thought she saw him, a flash of a familiar coat on the street, a crooked smile caught in a crowd. She knew Mark was in prison. She had testified. She had read the sentencing, but trauma had its own logic, its own long, echoing half-life. Ben noticed the way she flinched sometimes. He never asked, just waited, patient and steady, a hand within reach but never grabbing. Ava was grateful and terrified of needing anyone ever again. Chapter. Unsent letters late. One night, unable to sleep, Ava opened her journal again. This time she wrote to herself, "Dear Ava, you did not break. You bent, you burned, you grieved, and you still chose to stay, not with them, with yourself. I'm proud of you. I'm still scared, but I'm proud. Love, Ava." She closed the journal and left it on the windowsill, where the moonlight could touch. It proof she had survived, proof she intended to keep surviving. Chapter. Suspicion. Rainy evening. Walking home from the nonprofit office, Ava felt it again. A presence. Someone was following her. She ducked into a bookstore, heart hammering. Watched the door. No one came in. Maybe it was just fear, looping on itself. Maybe not. Ava bought a cheap paperback just to look casual, then slipped out the side exit and took the long way home. When she got back to her apartment, her hands were trembling too hard to fit the key in the lock. Ben called an hour later, sensing something in her voice even though she hadn't said a word about it. "Come over," he said gently. "I made soup. You don't have to talk. Just be here." And Ava, after a long moment, said, "Okay." Chapter. Planting season spring came late that year. One Sunday, Ava and Ben stood in his backyard, the ground still stubborn with frost, trying to plant a tiny herb garden. Ava laughed when the trowel hit a rock and nearly bent. Ben grinned, brushing mud off his jeans. "Ground's tougher than it looks." "So am I," Ava said lightly. Then she paused, surprised at herself. Ben didn't miss it. He squeezed her hand, muddy and all. They planted anyway. Mint, basil, rosemary, small, stubborn green things growing in broken ground. Very final image. Ava sits on the porch steps, watching the sun set behind the trees. The scent of mint drifts from the garden. Her phone buzzes in her pocket. Maya inviting her to a movie, Lena asking for coffee, Ben sending a photo of a ridiculous-looking herb sprout. Life. Messy, fragile, beautiful. Life she chose. A car passes down the street. A man, crossing the sidewalk, glances her way. Ava tenses for just a heartbeat, but the man keeps walking. Just a stranger, in a world full of strangers. And Ava exhales. She picks up her phone. She says yes to coffee, yes to the movie, yes to the messy, complicated, terrifying act of living. Not healed, but healing. Still standing, still choosing. True. Final line. The fault lines were still there, but now they were part of the map Ava was learning to live by, cracks and all. End. This section will feel like a quiet new season beginning, and slightly hint that Ava's past might still ripple forward in unexpected ways. Next part. Chapter. First storm. April came with sudden storms, rain lashing the windows, lightning cracking. The sky open. Ava sat by the window in Ben's living room, blanket wrapped tight around her knees, watching the trees whip and bow. It was strange, the way fear still lived in her muscles, like a second heartbeat, like a ghost. Ben came in with 2 mugs of tea, setting one silently in front of her. For a long time, they said nothing. The storm outside filled the space between them. Then Ava spoke, voice low. "I still don't feel safe sometimes." Ben didn't flinch, didn't rush to offer empty reassurances. He just said, "I know. And you don't have to be ready. Just have to be honest." Ava stared at the storm a long time before whispering, "I'm trying." Ben reached out, not to fix her, not to shield her, but just to be there. And Ava, for the first time, let herself lean into him, not for rescue, for rest. Chapter. The man at the edge. Weeks later, it happened again. At the Saturday farmers market, in the chaos of booths and bodies and noise, she saw a man, tall, dark jacket, face turned away, but something in the way he moved, the tilt of his head. Her chest tightened painfully. Mark? It couldn't be. It couldn't. But by the time she pushed through the crowd, the man was gone. She stood trembling among bins of oranges and tulips, breath ragged. A woman bumped her elbow and muttered a quick, "Sorry." A child ran past, laughing. The world spun. Aunt Ava turned her face up to the sun, closed her eyes, made herself count backward from 10. When she opened her eyes again, the man was nowhere to be seen. Maybe it was just fear. Or maybe fear had better instincts than she gave it credit for. Either way, she wasn't running anymore. Not without proof. Not without a fight. Chapter. Letters with no return address. That night, a plain envelope slid through her mail slot. No return address. No handwriting she recognized. Inside, a single piece of paper. Blank. No threats. No message, just the unnerving knowledge that someone knew where she lived. Subtle suspense rising. Ben insisted she report it. Maya offered to have a friend. In the police, look into it quietly. Omar set up a new alarm system for her front door. Ava said yes to all of it. Not because she was afraid, because she wasn't going to be helpless ever again. Because she believed herself now. Believed her fear. Believed her right to exist without apology. The blank letter didn't break her. It sharpened her. Chapter. Resilience. Isn't quiet by early May, the herbs were thriving, mint everywhere. Basil so thick it threatened to strangle itself. The rosemary stubborn and slow, but still alive. Sometimes Ava sat on the back step, dirt under her fingernails, and thought about how easy it would be to let fear uproot her, to let the past claim her future, piece by piece. But she wasn't running. Not anymore. If the past wanted to haunt her, it would have to work harder. Because she wasn't the same woman who had fled the ruins of her old life. She was someone new. Someone scarred, yes, but rooted. Bent, maybe. But not broken. Never broken. Powerful. Closing image. Ava kneeling in the dirt, hands planting seeds, rain on her back, hair plastered to her forehead, the old pain whispering at her edges, the new hope louder, steadier, pulsing through her fingertips. As she dug into the stubborn, living earth, you survived, you are surviving, you will survive, to be continued. Ava didn't mention the letter to many people. Only Ben. Only Maya. That was all she could handle. The police officer Maya knew, a woman named Detective Carter, came by Ava's apartment one afternoon. Professional, kind, sharp eyes, no fingerprints, Carter said, sliding the evidence bag across the table. No threats, no laws broken yet. Ava nodded stiffly. She hadn't expected justice. She just wanted to be ready. Listen, Carter said, lowering her voice. If this is someone testing you, the best thing you can do is show them you're not afraid. They thrive on fear. Ava swallowed. Fear had ruled too much of her life already. It wouldn't get the final word. Chapter Growing Pains. The following week, Ava hosted her first dinner since the divorce. A clumsy, awkward affair, burned garlic bread, too much wine, laughter that sounded just a little too loud. Ben was there, helping in the kitchen, teasing her about her questionable culinary skills. Maya brought a massive salad. Omar arrived late, lugging a cheesecake. Lena dragged in a battered guitar and played badly until everyone sang along. The apartment was too small. The chairs didn't match. Someone knocked over a candle. It was perfect, perfectly broken, perfectly real. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ava felt the edges of loneliness blurring. Not disappearing, but softening. Making space for something else. Chapter. The second letter. It arrived on a Tuesday. Same plain envelope, same blank paper, but this time tucked between the folds. A single pressed flower. Lavender. Dried. Fragile. And Ava understood. It wasn't random. It was personal. Mark's mother had grown lavender in her backyard. He had hated the smell. She remembered him sneering at it, crushing it under his heel. Someone knew. Someone was watching. Chapter. The hard choice. She could run again. Move, hide, change her number, disappear into some new version of safety, or she could stay, and refuse to surrender the life she'd fought like hell to rebuild. She met Ben at the park that evening. The air was thick with the smell of rain and wet leaves. Ava told him about the second letter. She watched his face tighten in anger. Saw him battle the urge to fix it for her. You're not alone, Ben said quietly. But it has to be your call. What you want to do. Ava leaned into the old oak tree behind her, feeling the rough bark against her spine. Grounding herself, rooting herself. I'm not leaving, she said. Her voice didn't shake. I'm not giving up my life again. Ben nodded once. Then we fight smart. Chapter. Silent weapons. Maya found her a private investigator. Discreet. Tough. A woman named Jules, who didn't believe in miracles, only hard evidence. Jules installed cameras, tracked phone numbers, asked questions Ava didn't know how to ask. You're not crazy, Jules said flatly over coffee one morning. Someone's testing you, trying to scare you, but they're being careful, too careful. Means they're scared too, scared of exposure, scared of Ava's strength, and that, strangely, comforted her. Chapter. The waiting season. The days blurred. Work, walks, dinner with friends, nights filled with vigilance, cameras checked, doors double-locked, every noise catalogued. But Ava lived, fully. She danced badly in the kitchen with Maya. She learned how to bake bread with Omar. She planted wildflowers beside the herbs in Ben's backyard. She laughed, even when she was scared. And little by little, she realized, this was what survival really looked like, not hiding from the fear. Living through it. Major closing image. One evening, sitting on her porch, Ava watched a thunderstorm roll in. Lightning split the sky. Thunder cracked the air wide open, and she sat there anyway. Didn't run inside, didn't hide, because the storm was real. But so was she. So was her life. So was her choice to stay standing, soaked to the skin, alive, in every trembling nerve. Real final lines. The storms could come, the ghosts could knock, the fear could howl at the door. Ava had roots now. It had been weeks since the second letter. The lavender still pressed between the pages of Ava's journal, a reminder she couldn't shake. Ava was no longer a woman running, but she wasn't untouched either. Her heart still beat a little faster whenever she saw an unfamiliar car idling down the street or someone lingering a little too long on the corner. The PI, Jules, had traced the phone number to a dead end. The cameras hadn't captured anything noteworthy. The letters kept coming, but always blank, always empty. Still, Ava's life was moving forward, and that, she told herself, was enough. She didn't let herself dwell. She didn't let fear dictate her next move. That night, though, something would change. Chapter. The letter that wasn't blanket came on a Friday. The same plain envelope. The same sterile, impersonal handwriting, but this time it was different. Inside, folded neatly, was a single sentence, written in dark ink. "You can't outrun what you've done." Ava's stomach turned as she read it. She felt the words press against, her skin like cold fingers. She sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the paper, not because it made sense, but because it didn't. What had she done? Was this Mark? Or someone else trying to hurt her? She couldn't tell anymore. The paranoia was blurring the lines. Ben called just as she dropped the letter on the kitchen table. He could hear something in her voice. "You okay?" Ava exhaled slowly. "I will be." Chapter. The tension grows the next day. Everything seemed different. The world felt quieter, more watchful. Ava started seeing the man again, the one she had glimpsed weeks ago at the market. Not often, but enough. She saw him once, walking past her apartment, disappearing into an alley. Another time, a shadow under the trees near the park. Once he lingered outside the window of the coffee shop she frequented. Ava's stomach knotted each time. She couldn't be sure it was the same person, but there was a nagging certainty deep inside her gut that she wasn't imagining it. Chateau. Letters. The strange man. Something was converging. Chapter. The confrontation. It was a Friday evening when she couldn't ignore it any longer. She walked into the coffee shop, ordered her usual, and then, there he was again. The man. Standing in the corner, coffee cup in hand, his back to her. For a moment, Ava stood frozen. Every instinct told her to turn around, leave, go home. But she didn't. She walked toward him. The man turned just as she reached his table. He was taller than she remembered, broad-shouldered with dark, shaggy hair, and his eyes were unmistakable. She froze. "I knew you'd recognize me," he said, his voice low. "I figured you'd show up eventually." Ava's heart pounded in, her chest. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't coincidence. It was him. "Mark," she whispered. The name felt foreign on her tongue. Mark smiled, but it wasn't a smile she remembered. It was cold, calculating. "Surprised to see me?" he asked, voice dripping with a twisted sort of amusement. Ava took a step back, not sure whether to fight or run. But she wouldn't run, not anymore. "What do you want?" she demanded. Mark shrugged, casually leaning back in his chair. "You think I'm just some ghost? Something you can bury and forget about?" His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time since her divorce, Ava felt a pulse of fear surge through her. She hadn't been ready for this. He leaned forward. I want you to remember, Ava. I want you to remember everything. Ava gritted her teeth. Why now? Mark's lips twisted into a grin. Because I have something you want, and something you need. Chapter: The Price of Truth. Ava didn't say anything. More. She turned and walked out of the coffee shop, her heart a chaotic drumbeat in her chest. She needed answers. She needed to know why Mark was back. But as she left, she didn't notice the man behind her, the shadow, the stranger she had seen before. Mark didn't just want her to remember. He wanted to tear her apart with the memories. And he was good. Edit chapter. Uncovering secrets Ava called Jules that night. Her hands were still shaking as she explained what happened. Jules was blunt. We're not done here, Ava. This guy's got plans. But even as Jules spoke, Ava felt something shift. The fight in her, the one she had buried under the weight of her trauma, started rising again. She wasn't going to run, not from Mark, not from anyone. That night, Jules set up a meeting with the private investigator, planning a confrontation. They'd figure out who Mark was working with. They'd end this, one way or another. Chapter: Breaking Point. The next week, Mark's game continued. Threats, notes, and the slow unraveling of everything Ava had worked so hard to rebuild. She wanted answers. She wanted to take control back. But the more she discovered about Mark's past connections, the more she realized he wasn't working alone. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. This was something bigger. Ava stood on the edge of a precipice. She could destroy him, or let him destroy her. And the worst part? She didn't know which one she wanted more.